What if the biggest threat to keeping your home isn't losing your job or missing a payment, but a law you didn't even know was passed? Across the U.S., property taxes are quietly being rewritten. Not all at once, not with headlines, but in ways that slowly reshape who can afford to stay and who gets pushed out. For many homeowners, especially seniors and middle-class families, the fear isn't today's bill, it's next year's surprise. The letter in the mail you didn't see coming. The rule change that sounds like relief until you realize someone still has to pay the difference. Before 2026, 10 U.S. states have passed major property tax changes, and where you live now could matter more than anything you've planned for retirement. Welcome to Tax Hack Pro. In this video, we break down new laws passed in 10 U.S. states, major property tax changes hitting before 2026, ranked by real impact, so you can see what is really changing and why it matters to your future. Number 1, Texas. What if the tax relief everyone is celebrating only buys you a little time, not real security? In Texas, that question matters more than anywhere else right now. Starting with the 2025 tax year, the state pushed through one of the biggest property tax changes in the country by sharply increasing the Homestead Exemption tied to school district taxes. For many homeowners, the most painful line on the bill finally stopped growing the way it had for years. On paper, it looks like a win. In real life, it feels like a deep breath after holding it for too long. Texas relies on property taxes in a way most states don't. With no state income tax, the system leans heavily on homeowners to fund schools and local services. For a long time, that balance felt manageable. Then home prices exploded. Appraisals jumped far faster than wages or retirement checks ever could. People who never moved, never remodeled, never cashed out, suddenly found themselves paying taxes as if they had. The value was theoretical. The bill was very real. For seniors living on a fixed income, this became more than a budgeting issue. It turned into a quiet countdown. Each appraisal notice raised the same unspoken question. How many more years can I do this? Middle-class families felt it too, not as panic but as pressure. Less room to save, less margin for mistakes, more money locked into a house that couldn't help pay its own tax bill. That is why this change passed so easily. Voters weren't chasing a tax cut, they were chasing predictability. The higher Homestead Exemption for school taxes did exactly what people hoped. It lowered bills immediately. For some households, the savings were large enough to matter. Not luxury money, stay-in-your-home money, the kind that lets you stop recalculating every year with dread in your stomach. But this is where homeowners need to pause, because relief and protection are not the same thing. School taxes didn't disappear. Texas promised to backfill the lost revenue with state funds, at least for now. From a homeowner's point of view, that detail barely registers. What they see is a smaller bill and a little breathing room. What they don't see yet is how long that promise can realistically hold as costs rise and enrollment grows. This is where the real risk lives, and it isn't obvious at first glance. When a system that depends on property taxes slows down, the pressure doesn't vanish. It looks for another place to surface. Sometimes that shows up as bonds. Sometimes as special assessments. Sometimes as fees that don't say tax on the label, but feel the same when you pay them. The danger isn't losing the exemption. It's assuming the exemption solved the problem permanently. There is another uncomfortable truth most people don't talk about. Not everyone benefits equally from this change. Homeowners with modest homes feel real relief. Buyers who stretch to purchase at today's prices still face heavy cash flow pressure. Renters don't see the exemption at all, but may still feel its effects later through higher local fees or reduced services. Even within Texas, the experience isn't uniform, and that unevenness matters over time. For now, the change does something powerful emotionally. It restores a sense of fairness many people felt was slipping away. It tells homeowners, especially older ones, that the system noticed the strain. That matters, but the deeper question remains unanswered. If home values continue rising 5 or 6% a year, how long does this relief actually last? Does it keep pace or does it quietly fall behind again? Texas made one of the boldest moves on property taxes before 2026, not because the system collapsed, but because too many people were getting close to their personal breaking point. This law gives time. What it doesn't guarantee is permanence. And for homeowners who have already learned how quickly conditions can change, that distinction is everything. Number 2, Florida. If Texas showed what happens when pressure finally forces a release, Florida tells a different story, one that unfolds slowly, year after year. In Florida, the fear isn't a sudden spike. It is the feeling that every single year, the grip tightens just a little more. Property taxes rise, insurance premiums jump, HOA fees creep up. None of it feels dramatic on its own. Together, it starts to feel relentless. That is why Florida's recent change matters in a quieter but deeper way. voters approved a constitutional amendment that ties part of the homestead property tax exemption directly to inflation. Instead of staying frozen while costs rise around it, the exemption now adjusts with the Consumer Price Index. On paper, it looks modest. No big headline number, no dramatic cut. But emotionally, it changes how homeowners experience the system. For years, Florida homeowners have lived with a sense that the rules were always lagging behind reality. Home values surged, especially in coastal and retirement-heavy areas. Insurance became the wild card no one could predict. For many seniors and longtime residents, the tax bill wasn't the biggest line item, but it was the one that never stopped moving. Each year felt like starting over, recalculating what could be trimmed, what could be postponed, what had to be sacrificed. This amendment didn't arrive because people demanded generosity. It arrived because they wanted fairness over time. When inflation eats away at purchasing power, a static exemption quietly loses its value. Florida's change acknowledges something homeowners already feel in their daily lives. If the cost of living rises, protection that doesn't rise with it eventually stops protecting anyone. The emotional shift here is subtle but important. Homeowners aren't suddenly paying far less. What they gain instead is predictability. The exemption doesn't just exist, it moves. It tracks the same inflation pressures that shape grocery bills, insurance renewals, and medical costs. For a retired couple living on a fixed income, that alignment matters more than a one-time reduction. It means the system isn't guaranteed to fall behind them every year. Still, this is Florida, and nothing exists in isolation. Property taxes are only one piece of a much heavier load. Insurance costs have become a real shock for many households, often rising faster than any tax relief can offset. When homeowners hear about an inflation-adjusted exemption, the immediate question isn't celebration, it is a comparison. Will this keep pace with what I am losing elsewhere, or will it just slow the damage? There is also a deeper tension that rarely gets discussed. When exemptions automatically rise, local governments have less flexibility. Revenue growth slows even as population and service demands increase. That pressure doesn't vanish. It shifts. Sometimes it shows up in fees, sometimes in special assessments, sometimes in cuts that homeowners don't notice until a service they rely on quietly disappears. Florida's approach feels less like a rescue and more like a guardrail. It doesn't stop the climb, but it prevents the system from drifting completely out of sync with reality. For many homeowners, especially seniors who chose Florida for stability, that matters emotionally. It restores a sense that the rules won't quietly erode their position year after year. But it also raises a question that lingers beneath the relief. If inflation stays high, if insurance continues to spiral, and if population growth strains local budgets, how much protection can an inflation-linked exemption really provide? Florida has chosen to move with the tide instead of standing still against it. Whether that is enough will only become clear over time as homeowners watch not just their tax bills, but everything else rising alongside them. Number 3. Colorado. What if your property tax bill didn't just depend on how much your home gained in value, but on a statewide decision to slow the entire system down? In Colorado, that is exactly what lawmakers stepped into, and it is why this state stands apart from the others. Colorado didn't simply add another exemption or trim a line on the bill. It rewired how fast property taxes are allowed to grow in the first place. Over the past few years, Colorado homeowners watched home values surge at a pace that felt unreal. Appraisals in places like Denver, Boulder, and surrounding suburbs jumped sharply, even for houses that hadn't changed at all. For many people, the fear wasn't abstract. It was immediate. A higher valuation didn't mean extra cash. It meant a tax bill that threatened to outrun wages, pensions, and fixed retirement income. And unlike states that rely on income taxes to soften the blow, Colorado's local governments depend heavily on property tax revenue to function. Beginning in the 2025-2026 window, Colorado moved to limit how much total property tax revenue can grow statewide, while also adjusting assessment rates that determine how much of a home's value is actually taxed. Instead of letting rising values automatically translate into higher tax collections, the system now applies a brake. When values rise too quickly, the rates adjust downward to keep overall growth within a set boundary. For homeowners, this feels like protection against runaway math. The appraisal may still climb, but the tax bill doesn't necessarily follow at the same speed. That distinction matters deeply, especially for longtime residents who aren't interested in cashing out their equity. They want stability, not paper wealth that turns into financial pressure. But Colorado's approach also exposes a different kind of tension. When the state caps revenue growth, local governments lose the ability to simply ride rising values to fund expanding needs. Schools, fire districts, and counties still face higher costs driven by inflation and population growth. The money doesn't disappear, but the automatic pipeline slows. That forces harder choices. Adjust budgets, seek voter-approved increases, or cut back quietly in places residents may not notice right away. This makes Colorado's change emotionally complex. Homeowners feel shielded from sudden spikes, which restores a sense of fairness after years of whiplash. At the same time, there is an underlying awareness that limits today can become pressure points tomorrow. If values continue to rise faster than allowed revenue growth, the system will keep compensating. But that compensation has consequences, and they don't always show up on the tax bill itself. Colorado's move before 2026 isn't about generosity. It is about control. It is an attempt to stop the tax system from accelerating beyond what real households can absorb. Whether that balance holds will depend on how long prices stay elevated and how communities adapt when the old assumptions about ever-growing revenue no longer apply. For now, Colorado stands as one of the clearest examples of a state trying to slow the machine without breaking it. Number 4, Georgia. After Colorado tried to slow the system from the top, Georgia took a path that feels gentler on the surface, but far more unsettling once you live inside it. Georgia passed a constitutional amendment that limits how fast property taxes are allowed to rise, tying increases to inflation. For homeowners who have watched their tax bills climb year after year while their income stood still, that sounds like protection. It sounds like someone finally drew a line, but that line doesn't land the same way for everyone. Imagine opening your mailbox, already tense, already bracing yourself, telling yourself, at least the state passed that cap. Then you open the bill. The number is higher again, not by much maybe, but enough to sting, enough to make you pause. That is the moment many Georgia homeowners are living in now, when the promise of protection collides with a reality they didn't expect. Here is why Georgia's cap isn't universal. Local governments and school districts can opt out, and many have. So whether that limit applies to you depends on decisions made in meetings you likely never attended, votes you may not have followed, lines drawn quietly on a map. The result is deeply personal. Two neighbors, same street, same kind of home, can experience completely different futures simply because they fall under different districts. The change didn't come out of nowhere. Home values surged across metro Atlanta and beyond. Longtime residents, especially seniors, began to feel like guests in neighborhoods they once anchored. They weren't flipping houses. They weren't chasing profits. They were staying. And staying started to feel expensive. The inflation cap was meant to slow that pressure, to make sure rising values didn't automatically turn into financial punishment. When the cap applies, it works. Bills rise more slowly. Planning becomes possible again. The constant anxiety eases. For retirees living on a fixed income, that difference shows up in quiet ways. Fewer nights staring at spreadsheets, fewer hard choices between essentials. It feels like being seen, but when the cap doesn't apply, something else creeps in. Confusion, distrust, a sense that the rules are shifting beneath your feet without warning. School districts that opt out often do so because they are afraid. Costs keep rising. Teachers still need to be paid. Buildings still need repairs. So the burden stays where it has always been, on homeowners who already feel stretched. Number 5, Missouri. What if your property tax relief didn't come from a law taking effect today, but from a question you haven't been asked yet? Missouri's approach to property taxes before 2026 isn't about immediate cuts or automatic caps. It is about uncertainty, and for many homeowners, uncertainty is its own kind of pressure. Missouri passed legislation that reshapes how property tax relief can happen at the local level by requiring certain counties to put tax-related measures directly on the ballot. In plain terms, your future tax bill may depend less on what lawmakers already decided and more on how your neighbors vote next. That might sound democratic, but it also shifts the burden of decision-making onto homeowners who are already stretched thin. For years, Missouri homeowners have watched assessments rise quietly, often faster than expected. The increases didn't always feel dramatic, but they added up. Seniors living on fixed incomes felt the squeeze first. Middle-income families followed. What made it harder was not knowing when or how relief would come, or whether it would come at all. The new framework promises a voice, but it also creates a waiting game. Relief becomes conditional. It depends on turnout, messaging, and how well people understand what is actually being voted on. For a homeowner opening their tax bill, that isn't reassuring. It replaces one kind of unpredictability with another. There is also a deeper tension here. Local governments rely on property taxes to fund basic services. When relief is decided by ballot, it can turn into a zero-sum fight between homeowners and the institutions they depend on. Schools, emergency services, and infrastructure all sit on the other side of that vote. No matter how it turns out, someone feels the loss. Missouri's story highlights a problem many states are wrestling with. When relief isn't automatic, it becomes fragile. Homeowners are left asking hard questions. If the measure fails, what is the backup plan? If it passes, how long does it last? And if your financial stability depends on a future election, how secure are you really? Before 2026, Missouri isn't offering certainty, it is offering a choice. And for homeowners who already feel the ground shifting under their feet, being told to wait and see may be the most unsettling change of all. Number 6, Kansas. If some states are trying to slow the system and others are trying to cap it, Kansas took a more direct route: reduce the portion of your home that gets taxed in the first place. Starting with the 2025 tax year, Kansas expanded property tax relief by increasing the amount of a home's value that is exempt when taxes are calculated. It is a simple change on the surface, but for many households, it lands right where the pressure is felt most. For Kansas homeowners, especially those who bought in the last few years, the problem wasn't just rising rates. It was the feeling that every dollar of value added to their home immediately turned into a higher obligation. Newer families felt it first. They stretched to buy, locked in a mortgage, and then watched taxes climb on top of everything else. Longtime residents felt it differently, as a slow erosion of breathing room they once had. Kansas's approach changes that math. By shielding a larger portion of a home's value from taxation, the state created relief that shows up directly on the bill. Not as a rebate later, not as a promise, as a smaller taxable number right now. For a young family, that can mean the difference between barely holding on and having a little room to adjust. For seniors, it can mean a tax bill that finally stops creeping into money meant for essentials. But as with every change on this list, there is a quieter side. When more value is exempt, local governments still have to balance the books. Schools, counties, and cities don't lose their responsibilities just because homeowners get relief. That tension doesn't hit immediately, but it lingers in the background, shaping future budget decisions. Number 7, New York. In New York, the problem with property taxes isn't just how high they are. It is how unforgiving they can be once you stop earning the way you used to. For many longtime homeowners, especially seniors, the fear isn't losing income overnight. It is watching fixed income collide with taxes that don't seem to care whether you are still working or not. New York's recent changes focus on that exact fault line. The state expanded and clarified property tax relief programs aimed at older homeowners, allowing local governments to raise senior exemption levels and adjust income thresholds tied to programs like STAR. On paper, it looks targeted. In practice, it can be the difference between staying put and being slowly forced out of a home you plan to keep for life. The pressure in New York builds quietly. Home values rise, particularly in suburban counties and commuter belts. Taxes follow. Retirement income does not. Many seniors don't feel poor, but they feel cornered. Their house is worth more than ever, yet it costs more each year just to remain in it. Selling feels like surrender. Staying feels risky. When local governments choose to apply higher senior exemptions, the relief is immediate and deeply personal. A reduced tax bill doesn't create comfort, it restores dignity. It means fewer trade-offs between property taxes and health care, between staying independent and asking for help. For households living on Social Security, pensions, or limited savings, those margins matter. But New York's approach also comes with unevenness. Not every locality adopts the maximum relief. Eligibility depends on income thresholds that don't always reflect real living costs, especially in high-cost areas. Some seniors fall just above the cutoff and feel the full weight of taxes anyway. That gap creates anxiety because it isn't about doing something wrong. It is about earning just enough to miss protection. Number 8, Illinois. In Illinois, property tax relief doesn't arrive as a discount. It arrives on time. And for many older homeowners, time is the one thing they are running out of. Illinois expanded its Senior Citizens Real Estate Tax Deferral program, raising income limits and allowing more seniors to postpone paying property taxes until the home is sold or transferred. It isn't flashy and it doesn't lower the bill, but it can keep people in their homes when cash flow tightens. For seniors living on a fixed income, the problem isn't always affordability today. It is liquidity. The house is paid for, or nearly so. The value is there, but the money isn't. Each tax bill becomes a test of endurance. Deferral changes that equation. It doesn't erase the obligation. It delays it, giving homeowners room to breathe without forcing a sale. Emotionally, this kind of relief is complicated. It feels like help, but it also feels like a reminder. the taxes will come due eventually. For some, that is an acceptable trade. Staying home matters more than what happens later. For others, it creates unease, knowing the bill is quietly stacking up in the background. Illinois' move before 2026 acknowledges a hard truth. Not everyone needs a tax cut. Some people need time to stay where they are. The deferral program offers that without pretending it solves the deeper problem of high property taxes. It buys stability in the present while leaving future questions unanswered. And for many seniors, that may be enough to keep going, at least for now. Number 9. Arizona. Arizona's property tax change before 2026 doesn't speak directly to homeowners at first glance, but its impact can ripple outward in ways many people don't expect. The state approved a major increase in the exemption for business personal property taxes, raising the threshold to protect small businesses from being taxed on equipment, tools, and furnishings. It is a move aimed at economic stability, but its consequences reach beyond storefronts and warehouses. For small business owners, especially family-run operations, this change is meaningful. Fewer taxes on essential equipment can mean survival in a high-cost environment. It keeps shops open, employees paid, and services available in local communities. In places where small businesses anchor neighborhoods, that matters. For homeowners watching Arizona's change, the emotion is mixed. On one hand, a healthier business environment supports jobs and local economies. On the other, there is unease. If relief isn't coming directly to homeowners, are they next in line to absorb the pressure? Will future budgets lean more heavily on residential property to compensate? Number 10. New Mexico. New Mexico's property tax change before 2026 is quieter than most, but emotionally it carries a different kind of weight. The state expanded its property tax exemption for military veterans, raising the exempt amount significantly and indexing it to inflation starting in 2026. On paper, it is a targeted adjustment. In real life, it speaks to a group that often feels overlooked once their service ends. For many older veterans, homeownership is the last stable thing they have. Income may be fixed. Healthcare costs are unpredictable. The house becomes the anchor. A higher exemption doesn't make life easy, but it eases pressure where it matters most. It is fewer trade-offs, fewer moments of choosing between essentials, fewer reminders that stability is fragile. Unlike broader tax reforms, New Mexico's change doesn't pretend to solve the system. It acknowledges something simpler. Some homeowners carry burdens that don't show up on a tax bill. By tying the exemption to inflation, the state avoids a familiar mistake, letting relief erode quietly over time. Still, even targeted relief raises broader questions. When one group receives more protection, others wonder where they stand. Can the state sustain it? Will similar adjustments come for seniors without veteran status? Or does protection remain conditional on who you are, not just what you can afford? New Mexico closes this list not with a sweeping fix, but with a reminder. Property tax policy isn't only about numbers. It is about recognition. And for veterans who want to age in place without constant financial strain, that recognition may matter as much as the dollars themselves. 10 states, 10 different approaches, but the same shared concern. Holding on to a home is becoming harder every year. What is happening shows that property taxes are no longer just numbers on paper, but real pressure felt in everyday life. If this feels familiar to you, like and subscribe to Tax Hack Pro and comment the state you live in so we can continue breaking down the changes that directly affect you. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our daily content. Now, feel free to check out some of the newest and best videos currently shown on your screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.